All right, hey guys, welcome to our next lesson, which is going to be covering informative writing. All right, so what I want to do for this lesson, our main objective is to give you all the tools that you need in order to write your first essay, which will be over To Kill a Mockingbird. Okay, so before we get started with how to format, I'm going to move this little guy up here. Let's talk about the three different types of writing that you'll be doing in high school. Okay, you'll be doing it in this class. I'll kind of be teaching you guys some of the foundation that you'll need in order to be writing the rest of these in high school. Okay, so the first type of writing that you will see for essays is a narrative writing. We're actually going to be doing this in January when we come back from Christmas, and we're going to be doing it to Edgar Allan Poe, which I love. We're going to be doing it with Cask of Amontillado. But narrative writing is basically just finishing a story. It's writing a story, it's writing characters and main conflict and things like that. And that's typically our more creative students really get into narrative writing. So we will be doing that, but not until the spring semester. And then we have informative and argumentative. So these types of papers are typically big favorites of students that have a very analytical mind and more of a science and math. They like the structure because they are so heavily structured and there's a very clear pattern to what goes next. And we've kind of been building up to it when we've been doing our ICT lessons. Okay. So the difference between them two, you can see here. So in the blue, it says informative is writing that is used to inform the reader on a subject. Okay, so this is you just giving information to whoever's reading your essay. Now for argumentative is when you're trying to persuade your reader over something that is considered bias. Okay, so should cell phones be allowed in school? That's considered argumentative. Okay, so today we will be learning informative. All right, so if you think about an essay, you typically think of the classic 5-paragraph essay. That's basically what we're going to be practicing this week. Okay, so this is all. This slide is kind of showing you what you need to include in your first paragraph, which is going to be your introduction. So I'm going to go through the 3 things that you need to have, and then I'm going to explain how to write them all. Okay. So if you need to pause the video or rewind it to get a little bit of clarification, feel free to do whatever you need to do, okay? So the first sentence of your informative paper is going to be your hook statement. Okay, so this is a sentence that is going to engage the reader. This can be a quote, a question, a statistic. Lots of different things can engage the reader, and I'm going to give you a few of my tips and tricks here in a second over to writing a great hook statement. All right, your second thing that you will need in your introduction is what we call the BFAT section. And it's an acronym. So it stands for background knowledge, format, author, and title. So this is where you write the text that you're using, who wrote it, and imagine the reader doesn't know the story. This typically takes up about 2 to 4 sentences in your introduction. Okay, so your first sentence is your hook. Your second through 4 or 5 sentences is your VFAT. And then your last sentence is your thesis, okay? The big kahuna, the most important part of your paper. This is the main point of your paper. And so I'm going to give you a little tip for that in a second, which is basically where you reword the prompt and put in your main points. Now, we've already been kind of practicing writing our hook statements when we've been doing our ICTs, but I'll kind of explain it and show you a few examples of what that looks like, okay? So let's look at a few different ways that you can write a hook statement. Okay, so these are my 3 different ways that I can kind of encourage students to kind of find the one that feels the most natural to them. Okay, so one way that you could write a hook is to pick one word in the prompt and define it for your reader. Okay, so if you look at the example, right, I'm under number 1. All right, this is the question that you guys are going to be answering in this paper. Okay, how is the theme of bravery and courage developed in part 1? And this is part 1 of To Kill a Mockingbird. All right, so an example hook where I picked one word from the prompt and defined it, I picked the word courage. All right, so I want to define what courage means. So my hook would be to have courage means that a person will stand up for what is right no matter what the consequences are. Okay, and that's the hook. That's all you have to do. You pick one word from the question that you're answering, and then you answer it. Okay, because that's immediately going to tell the reader what they can be expecting out of your paper. Now, the second tip or the second way that you could write a hook statement is just to share a general statement. Okay, this is typically a little bit harder for students to come up with because it's completely natural. It's completely something that you are creating on your own. So, for example, if we're answering that same question with how is the theme of bravery and courage developed in part 1? An example hook of a general statement about that topic would be there are many ways to view bravery and courage in everyday life. And again, it's a very broad statement that's teaching whoever's reading your paper what the question is that you are answering. Okay? So that is my two biggest tips for students. I really like tip number 1 typically. That kind of keeps students extremely focused and making sure that they're not just summarizing the text, but they're really getting into what the prompt is asking them to do. Now, notice that I do have a tip number 3, but I want to caution you with tip number 3. So tip number 3 is to ask an open-ended question without saying you. This is something that typically students are taught in middle school to kind of ask a question and that'll hook your reader and get them interested into it. The reason why I like to present some caution with this tip is there's a few different ways that this can get you into trouble. One, a lot of times when students are told to ask a question, they will naturally put in informal pronouns into it, like you, me, us, we, things like that. And 2, if you ask a question and your reader feels a certain way about that question, then they don't have to read the rest of your paper. So, for example, if you're writing an argumentative essay and you say, should cell phones be allowed in school? But you are maybe talking to a 65-year-old teacher who hates cell phones, they will say no to that question, right? And then they don't have to read your paper. And so I like to caution students kind of away from tip number 3, but I do put it in there because sometimes students will spend so much time trying to think of a hook statement because it is completely creative that they're kind of wasting a lot of time. And when you get to like a time test where you're doing a timed essay, I don't want you to get too bogged down by trying to think of a good hook statement. So I will let you ask an open-ended question if you absolutely positively have to. However, you cannot say you, and it cannot be a yes or no question. Okay. So for example, looking at the same question, what is the theme of bravery and courage, or how is the theme of bravery and courage developed in part 1? So an example hook where I ask an open-ended question without saying you would be something like, what does it mean to have courage and bravery? Okay. Again, you can't answer yes or no to that question. Okay. And I also did not use any impersonal pronouns with that as well. So I would really prefer you to pick either 1 or 2. But if you're at a timed writing task, or if you are really, really bogged down and you cannot think of anything else besides a question, you may use a question. But really try to get away from that, okay? All right, so now let's look at the BFAT. All right, so for the BFAT, this is questions or sentences number 2, typically 2 to 4 of your introduction paragraph. So this is kind of like the meat of where you're getting most of your analysis from. Okay, so there's several different ways that you could format the BFAT section, and I kind of giving you 3 different ones here. Okay, so what you can see in red is the format that you can use. So you can say in the author's name and then the format that it comes in. So is it a play? Is it a short story? Is it a poem? Is it a novel? Okay, what is it? The title of the work that you're talking about, and then the summary. Okay. So to look at that format kind of broken down, let me get my little highlighter here. Okay, that works. Oh, that's what I need. Okay, so you can see in authors, so who's the author? The author is Harper Lee. All right, so in Harper Lee's, then the next part of our formula is you need to list the format. So that would be a book. The format of what we are reading is a book. So in Harper Lee's book, and then what's the next thing that we have to include? We have to include the title. All right. So the title is To Kill a Mockingbird. So in Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, she writes about, and then summarize the book really, really quickly. A young girl living in the 1930s. Again, that wasn't extremely detailed. For your introduction, it's just a very brief overview. It's if somebody were to ask you on the street, hey, have you read To Kill a Mockingbird? What could be a 1 to 2 sentence summary that you could kind of wrap up for them? That yes, I read it. This is kind of what it's about. That's what the BFAT statement's for. Another way that you can write the BFAT statement, look at this, another format that you can use. So you can say in the, and then insert the format, then the title, and then have a comma, and then insert the author's name again, writes about, and then include the summary. So what this would look like is in the book, which is the format, To Kill a Mockingbird, which is the title, Harper Lee, which is the author, writes about a young girl living in the 1930s, which would be the summary. Okay, so I'm going to unhighlight me here. So the third way, typically when I teach this in class, I have students practice this up on the board, but we'll just talk through it together for our VLP. Okay, so it says in the title, a format by the author, the reader learns about, and then you do the summary. So what this would look like is, let me get my little highlighting, sometimes it's easier. In To Kill a Mockingbird, a book by Harper Lee, the reader learns about a young character named Scout. Okay, boom. That's all the BFAT statement is. Okay, and again, when you're writing your actual essay, I do want you to kind of beef up that summary a little bit more. This was just to introduce you to what the BFAT statement is. Okay, so obviously for this BFAT, I just said a young girl living in the 1930s. I would want you to expand a little bit more about this section, this summary, because the BFAT section really should be about 2 to 3 sentences each, especially if you're trying to meet that minimum 5-sentence paragraph requirement. Okay. All right, and now your thesis. So this is the very end of your introduction paragraph. So this is where you answer the question and you preview what your main points are going to be. Okay, typically you would need about 3 points, which would be 1 for each body paragraph. Now, I fully understand that not every single prompt is going to need 3 paragraphs. There's going to be some times when we only need where the question, we can answer it in 2 body paragraphs. There's sometimes that we're going to write a paper and we need 6 body paragraphs, okay? So that will fluctuate. For this paper, I want you to practice 3 just because we're practicing. This is a good way to practice really clear, cohesive structure, okay? And that's typically more of the classic essay that you will see in a lot of classes other than English. But in English, I do know that there are lots of times when the 5-paragraph essay does not always answer the question, okay? But for this paper, it will. Okay, so what that means is each point will be for each body paragraph. So point 1 is for body 1. Point 2 in your thesis is for body paragraph 2. And then point 3 is for your third body paragraph right before your conclusion. Okay, again, my tip is to make sure that you use the same language from the prompt in order to answer your question. So look at blue. This is the question that we're answering. How is the theme of bravery and courage developed in part 1? Okay, so this is an example of thesis that you could use for your paper. So Harper Lee develops a theme of bravery and courage in part 1. So again, I'm just rewording this and answering it through key events, characters, and setting. Okay, so notice I have 3 clear points. My point 1 is my key events. My point 2 is how she uses characters to develop the theme. And then my point 3 is this setting and how she uses this setting to develop the theme. Okay, so that means my first body paragraph will be talking about events. My second body paragraph will be talking about the characters. And my third body paragraph will be talking about how the setting is being used to develop that theme. Okay. All right, so this is something that you guys are already kind of familiar with, which is the iced tea. So this will be your 3 body paragraphs will be in iced tea format. So let's kind of review what we learned with iced teas. All right, so iced tea is basically the formula that we use in order to write a good body paragraph. So for the I, all right, this is your first sentence in your body paragraph. This is where you introduce your main point. Okay, so this is where if we go back, so if we were looking at body 1, the first body paragraph will be talking about key events, okay, because that's my first point in my thesis. So here, what you'll want to do is you'll say key events is one way that Harper Lee develops the theme. Okay, I'm just reintroducing what my main point is that I'm talking about. If I was talking about point number 2, or if I'm in body paragraph number 2, I'd be talking about the characters. So I could say Harper Lee also uses characters to develop her theme in part 1. If I'm talking about, or if I'm in body paragraph 3, I'd be talking about the setting. So I could say, the setting also plays an important role in developing the theme of bravery and courage. Okay, so again, you're just introducing your main point. Now, C is where you cite the evidence. So this is where you go in and you find a direct quote from your text. So for us, we are using part 1 of To Kill a Mockingbird. So there's a lot of evidence to sift through, which is why we've been doing those boxes. You can find a lot of help if you look back at those paragraph boxes. I've actually been having you guys cite examples of bravery and courage this entire time, so you have lots of evidence that you can pick from. But you put in your quote here for your second sentence. Your third and fourth sentence is where you explain how that evidence proves your main point. So for example, let's talk about body 1. If body 1, we're talking about key events, okay? And the key event that I pick is when Jim goes up and he slaps the house, okay? And that's in, I think, chapter 1, chapter 2. I then would want to explain in 2 sentences how that event shows bravery and courage. Okay? And then your last one is T, which is to transition. So when you're transitioning, think of transition as a springboard to the next paragraph. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to tie up the information that was in your body paragraph that you just finished, and you want to kind of preview what your next body paragraph is going to be about. So if I'm transitioning from key events to talking about the characters, I could say the characters during the events are just as important as the event itself. That is a perfect way to transition to me talking about the characters. Okay? If I'm transitioning from characters to setting, I could say something like, the characters, all right, have to show constant bravery when they're interacting with the creepy Radley house. Again, I'm talking about what my body paragraph was about, but previewing what the next one will be about, which is the Radley house being really scary, which is how that setting is developed, okay? All right, so that is your 3 body paragraphs. We'll follow that iced tea method. Introduce, cite, explain, transition. Now, your very last paragraph is your conclusion. So there's 3 parts of the conclusion paragraph. All right, so the first thing you do is you restate your thesis statement. So this is where you basically just reword everything you've said. Okay, so you're not saying anything new in your conclusion paragraph. Okay, everything is going to be just reworded or spun in a new way. There's no evidence, no quote, nothing brand new. Okay, so what you do is you just reword your thesis statement. Then you summarize your main points. Typically, this is about 2 to 3 sentences. And then the last sentence in your conclusion is the so what sentence. This is the drop mic sentence. So this is when you explain, why does this matter? Now, what I want you to do with this is I want to relate your topic back to real life. End it with a question or leave your reader thinking more about the topic. Now, with this, you still have to be formal. So that means you cannot say you cannot say I, we, us. You can't say things like that. If you are wanting to say it something specific, you can always reference the reader. Okay, so the reader learns that bravery and courage can be seen in multiple different avenues. This could be a way that you would have the ending impression. Okay, but you never ever want to use those personal pronouns in that ending impression. But think of the ending impression, that last sentence in your paper, as the drop mic. Okay, this is the so what, why did I just read this sentence? Okay. All right, so let's look at an example of how to restate your thesis. So this is our thesis statement, what we just reviewed. All right, so Harper Lee develops the theme of bravery and courage in part 1 through key events, characters, and setting. All right, that's what we use in our introduction. A way that we could restate that in our conclusion would look like this. Through events, characters, and setting, Harper Lee creates a strong theme of bravery and courage. So do you see how we said the exact same thing, but we just said it in a different way? That's what I want you to do when you're restating your thesis. The same thing in a new way. So you can change some of the words, like instead of saying characters, you could say people. Instead of saying bravery, you can say a synonym for bravery. Or there's kind of think about this as kind of explaining things in a different way to somebody who didn't understand your first sentence. Okay. All right. Now your summary. Let me move this little guy down. Now, your summary of your main points is when you take 1 to 3 sentences, and this is where you reword your I statements or your E statements, just like what we did when we restated our thesis. Okay, this is where you're just rewording your E statements. Okay, for in your body paragraphs. And then again, that last sentence is when you give your reader something to think about or explain why they should care. Very important. Do not say you. Okay. If you want to say you, just say the reader instead. Okay. All right. So really quick before I show you how this is kind of broken down, things to make sure that you leave out of your paper. Like I've been saying, no personal pronouns. You want to leave out any elementary school words like and then, first, second, third, in conclusion, etc. And then obviously any informal language like fitna to, that reader, okay, things like that. Leave that stuff out. Now, these are things that I want you to include in your paper. And if you're following this format, then you are making sure that you have all of these included. All right. So 1, always make sure that you include the title and the author, the text that is being used. That you have a thesis statement. That you have your introduction paragraph, your body paragraphs, your conclusion. Then make sure that within those body paragraphs, you have your evidence. All right. So this is me. I'm very excited that we are about to start writing our papers. So this is the question that you guys are writing. How does Harper Lee develop the theme of bravery and courage in part 1 of To Kill a Mockingbird? This is the question that you guys are going to write. Now, what I did is this is kind of a funnel outline that I have for you guys. Let me move this little guy over here. Okay. So in the classroom, this is what I give to my students first as they are, let's see if I can get this little thing to come back up. As they are preparing to write in the text, okay, or as they're preparing to write their essays. So let me see if I can write on here. So this stands for your introduction paragraph, okay? And sometimes if you like to write things out, I highly recommend pausing this video and going to get an extra sheet of paper so you can kind of write out this funnel outline, okay? But it's completely up to you. So what you can see is this is a big triangle, all right, upside down. And what I have students do is I have them draw 3 sections. So this first section represents your hook. It's very hard to draw on this thing. The second section is your BFAT, which stands, remember, for your background, format, author, title. And then you have your thesis, right? I'm just going to do cursive. It's a little easier. Okay. So this is your introduction paragraph. Now, the reason why I have it listed this way as a funnel outline is notice that this is bigger than this, right? Just spatially. Now, the reason why it looks like that is your hook statement should always be something that's very generalized. All right. Your thesis, however, is something extremely small and specific, only answering the question that is being asked. So your hook, for example, is just about bravery and courage in the world. Then you're getting a little bit more narrow as you're talking about Harper Lee's writing. And then you answer that question, which is the most specific that you can get. Okay, so this little triangle represents your intro. Now these all represent the 3 body paragraphs. Okay, so this is body paragraph number 1, body paragraph number 2, body paragraph number 3, and they all within it have the 4 sections. Okay, I'm going to divide them all out and then just reiterate what they stand for. All right, so remember your body paragraphs, you will have your I statement, which is where you introduce your main point, your C statement, where you cite your evidence, your E statement, which is where you explain your evidence back to your thesis, and then where you transition. Now remember, transition, you are transitioning from this paragraph to this paragraph. And then you transition from this paragraph to this paragraph. And then you transition from this paragraph to the last paragraph. So this paragraph down here represents your conclusion. Okay. So again, there are 3 parts of your conclusion. So here is where you restate your thesis. All right, so this is where you are just rewording in a new way what you said in that introduction. Here is where you summarize. All right, you are summarizing your E statements. So just saying them in a new way. And then here is your ending. Ooh, that's hard to read. Sorry, guys. Ending impression. Okay. So this is the drop mic moment. So why does your reader care? Why is this important? All right. Now, again, notice the size of the triangle. So for the triangle, you start extremely specific, talking about the thesis, and then you end very broadly, bringing it back to real life, bringing it back to your reader. So starting very specific and then getting very broad. Okay? So let's go to my next, let me see if I, hold on one second, guys. Okay. I don't think it's going to let me play anymore because I have this pen. Okay. There we go. Okay. So I'm just going to leave the pen where it is. I'll just leave the pen where it is because I can't get rid of it now. Okay. So what I'm going to have for you guys, right here, you can see 3 different, or these are all the different examples that I have found through To Kill a Mockingbird that you are more than welcome to pick from. Okay, so you have Jim hitting the Boo Radley house in chapter 1, Scout standing up to Miss Caroline for Walter in chapter 2, Little Chuck Little standing up to Burris Ewell, the kids going to the Radley property, Jim going back to get his pants, Mr. Avery jumping out of the window, Boo Radley putting a blanket on Scout, Scout defending Atticus defending Tom, Atticus defending Scout, Scout defending Boo Radley, Boo Radley putting a blanket on Scout, Scout defending Atticus, Atticus defending Tom, Atticus defending Scout, Scout defending Atticus, Atticus defending Tom, Jim reading to Mrs. DeBose, or Mrs. DeBose facing drug-free death. So, ma'am, do you have a lot of evidence that you could pick from? You are only picking 3. Okay? So 1 will be for one body paragraph, 2nd, 3rd. Okay? So what I'm about to show you is an example of what your essay could look like. And I'm going to kind of show you the different types again, and then I'm going to leave you alone and let you go type. Okay? So a sample introduction for the question that we're answering. Remember, the question that we're answering is this. Right? How does Harper Lee develop the theme of bravery and courage in part 1? So this is a sample introduction. So I started with the hook statement here. And then I have my summary, my BFAT. So notice my BFAT is a lot longer, like I said, what I want you guys to do. And then the green represents the thesis. So let's look at it all together and what it would kind of read like. So there are several definitions of what bravery and courage really are. In To Kill a Mockingbird, Harper Lee explores those definitions in a story of a young narrator named Scout, who is faced with several obstacles and challenges as she is forced to grow up and understand the world around her. The story takes place in southern Alabama during the 1930s in a segregated America, where Scout and Jim are faced with many opportunities to show the reader they are braver than they may appear. Harper Lee develops her theme of bravery and courage in her writing through her use of characters. Okay, so what I did, instead of having 3 main points, all 3 points will be talking about the characters. Okay, now let's look at an example body paragraph. Okay, so this is what a body paragraph would look like if I'm focusing on characters. Okay, so this would be like body paragraph 3, because it looks like here I'm transitioning maybe to my conclusion. All right. So again, for my body, I have 4 sections. So I have my I statement, my C statement where I have my direct evidence, my E where I explain that evidence, and then my green is my transition. Okay, so it says, as the reader can see the event of Jim standing up to Mrs. DeBose as brave, there's also the courageous act being done behind the scenes. In chapter 11, Mrs. DeBose is desperately trying to overcome her drug addiction before she passes away, a painfully difficult task. Atticus applauds her courage on page 149 when talking to Jim. I want you to see what real courage is. She was the bravest person I ever knew. This quote explains that even though Mrs. DeBose is hateful towards the Finch family, she is still someone to be respected. Overcoming a drug addiction is not an easy feat, and yet Mrs. DeBose makes it her goal. As seen in the chapter, Mrs. DeBose's body goes through a hard time detoxing from drugs, but she powers through. Lee uses this character to show that despite different belief systems, courage can be seen in many different ways and may come. Okay, boom. So I had my I, my C, my E, and my T. And now this is an example of a sample conclusion. So again, conclusion has 3 parts. So here I had my, I restated my thesis. And then the green is where I'm summarizing. And then my ending impression is the red. So through expert writing, Harper Lee creates a world of bravery and courage for her readers to explore. This is seen through her use of characters like Jim and Scout, her use of creepy setting like the Radley property, and several key events. Chapter 11 is a perfect depiction of all 3 of these techniques. Harper Lee wants to show her reader that courage and bravery can't be so easily defined into one easy box. Okay? So this is how I'm going to be grading you, which I wish I could get. Hold on, let me try to see if I can push this. Where's my tools? Sometimes I get those little tools will disappear and then they're gone forever and I feel like I can never get them back. Okay. All right, so this is how you will be writing your essay, or this is how I'm going to be grading your essay. Okay, so there's 4 different categories that I'm looking for. So there's focus on organization, there's development, language, and then conventions as well. Okay, so focus on organization. Basically, I'm looking at, do you have your your 3 different sections? So do you have an introduction, your body paragraphs, and your conclusion? And then do you have those good transitions? That's what I'm looking for the focus on organization. For development, I'm looking at your E statements. Okay, so for this, I'm looking at, does your evidence explain and answer your thesis? Okay, did you explain the evidence well enough where I understand why you used it? Language is, are you using good vocabulary? Do you have good sentence variety? Are you using good transitional language? And did you keep things objective yet formal? And then conventions, which is just grammar. Okay, so did you have spell check? Did you use the comma correctly? Things like that, right? So that is what I want you guys to work on. Okay, so in THESIS, you will see under task 3, it has your a link to the Google Doc. I want you to open up that Google Doc. And then from there, all you have to do is type in your essay and then submit that URL into THRIVUS to get credit. Okay. If there are any questions, please do not hesitate to email me. I know this was a lot of information for you guys, which is one reason why I wanted to record it, so you guys can always reference back, and you can kind of pause or replay anything that you needed a little bit more clarification on. If you are still confused, please reach out, let me know, and we can absolutely set up a meeting to go over a writing workshop together. Okay? All right, I hope this is helpful. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.